Hello everyone, Adam here, and I'm up in the orchard at the top of the garden. And in this video today, I'd like to talk a bit about how gardening is beneficial for our health and well-being. Now, obviously gardening is an active activity, so it's very good for our exercising and for our active and physical health. But something I think is often overlooked is how gardening is very beneficial for our mental health. Personally for me, I've turned to the garden, when I've felt stressed with a lot of things on my plate, when I've felt a bit down, when I've gone through grief as well, because I think that's the important point, is that our outdoor spaces are there to help us, and it doesn't matter what kind of outdoor space that you've got. For me, my delight is growing vegetables and flowers, but even if you wanted a wilder garden, or if you've just got a patio where you can just sit and enjoy, that's completely fine. The important thing is that we go outside and we use the spaces that we've got. I find that, for example, when I'm planting a row of maybe sweet peas in the garden, 10 of the same plants over and over, the task is quite monotonous. But actually, because I don't have to think when I'm doing that, my brain and my mind gets a time to relax and just be at ease, instead of feeling that I've got to be in touch with the world and what's happening on the news headlines, how's the internet, what's happening on social media, what's happening on the telly. It's a time to actually say, well, I don't need to know all these things constantly to be happy. I can just go out into the garden, have time for myself and think and reflect on how my day's gone and how I feel. And there's a lot of research that's been made actually in terms of how soil and feeling the soil is good for our well-being, and it's like a therapy. And I think that sometimes just getting your hands in a clump of soil and breaking that soil through your fingers, when it feels great on the skin, but also it just makes you feel really close to nature and at ease with yourself. And it's part of that, using that time to find peace and to find a time to relax. And I think that's the most vital point about gardening, is it's an outdoor space that has so many possibilities for us. And for me, those things I've just listed now really do help me with my mental health. Another great thing about gardening is that you don't have to be a master of your trade. You're always learning something new. There are things I've done in the garden and I've wondered, well, why hasn't it grown how I'd wanted it to grow this year? For example, I sown tomato seeds a few weeks back and only half of them germinated. But it's that trial and error. It's learning, well, okay, maybe I'll plant them different next year, because there are some things we can't control. We can't control the weather, for example. We can just respond to how the weather treats us on what particular day. So, for example, this spring, it's been a fantastic spring for the tulips and the flowers in the garden, because we haven't had much rain or wind. So I've been able to enjoy those rather than think about, well, why didn't my growing of tomatoes work? Because ultimately, and I've been doing this for 20 years, gardening, ultimately it's learning from your mistakes and developing from them, and actually accepting that sometimes it's not through your own faults that something happens, rather that you can adapt to a new way of growing something or change how you plan to do something based on what you've learned from what's happened in the past. And I think the prime point is that actually it's how we respond to the uncontrollable that defines how we feel, rather than allowing that to take over our thoughts. And it's trying to be a positive about how we can actually use the circumstances we find ourselves in and the reality we find ourselves in to do things differently. And that's what I love about gardening, because it just creates so many opportunities to do that. Gardening is also very good to control anxiety. Sometimes we can feel that the garden, for some particular reason, is going to be a lot of work or going to consume a lot of time. But it doesn't have to be like that. There are a few things we can do, some techniques we can use to help us control that feeling of overwhelm in terms of the tasks we have to do, for example, in the garden. Now, for me, one of the things I love doing is doing a to-do list before I go out into the garden, because by doing that, I can see that actually, by investing a little bit of time in the morning, I've managed to accomplish so many different tasks in the little time I had that day. And also as well is creating a plan. Now, there's nothing more exciting than in the spring, getting your seed packets out or your flowers plants out and drawing up a plan of where you're going to place them in the garden, because then you can see how the future is going to look in the garden, how your garden's going to evolve as the months go on. And I think as well, if you've got a large garden, doing a plan, you feel that actually you're taking control of the amount of work you have to do in the garden. You're doing it step by step, rather than feeling that you have to complete everything all in one go. Ultimately for me, and it's something I've always known, gardening is just a really close-knit community of people who just are kind to each other, who share knowledge, information, flowers, plants, seeds, you name it. It's always been a community that's been eager to cooperate with each other and help each other. So, I'd encourage you, join that community and just be kind to yourself. Make the time, if you do anything over the next few days, to just spend it outside, listen to the birds sing, listen to the bees buzzing past you, and just look at nature all around you, and just really enjoy taking the time in your garden.